General Flynn's resignation is not the end of the story. It is merely the beginning. There needs to be an independent and transparent investigation. The White House counsel cannot lead this investigation, and the new Attorney General cannot be, Jeff Sessions, cannot be the person to lead that investigation. I expect Jeff Sessions to recuse himself, and B, I expect what's put in its place to be independent, transparent, and impartial. We'll wait and see what they propose.
It's the Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer today calling for an independent investigation of Michael Flynn, who has now resigned as National Security Advisor, saying the White House counsel can't lead this investigation. The new Attorney General cannot be the person to lead that investigation. There needs to be an independent investigation. Since last year, the FBI and the CIA have both been reportedly investigating General Flynn's contacts with the Russian government. The U.S. Army is reportedly also investigating whether he illegally received money in the form of speaking fees from the Russian government during his trip to Russia in December 2015. That's the trip where General Flynn went to a gala dinner and sat next to Vladimir Putin. That was less than 2 months before the Iowa caucuses. That was December 2015. When the Washington Post interviewed Mike Flynn about that trip last year and asked him what he talked to Putin about, General Flynn told the Post that their questioning on that topic was boring. That was his quote, boring. That's how seriously he's taken these worries. According to U.S. intelligence agencies, the Russian campaign to influence the U.S. presidential election consisted of hacking, stealing data, selective leaks, also the direct propaganda side of it, these prolific efforts by the Russian government to inject false news stories into the campaign, to undercut damaging news that might hurt Donald Trump, to disrupt social media interaction among Clinton supporters, to overwhelm authoritative sources of news and information with nonsense and noise. And some of those tactics are one size fits all for the Russians, right? The Russians have experience using those tactics in other countries where they've interfered, like Sweden and Estonia and other countries. But to the extent that those techniques could be further enhanced by tailoring them to U.S. environment, did they get any U.S. help? Did they get any U.S. advice on the best ways to weaponize their tactics against our election, against our system of government? I mean, it's worth asking now, did Michael Flynn help them? I mean, when he was in contact with the Russian government during the campaign, before the election, during the campaign, did General Flynn help them in their efforts to interfere in our election? Did anybody else on the Trump campaign help them? I mean, as U.S. intelligence agencies and Congress are investigating Russian interference in the election designed to benefit Donald Trump, there is this record of General Flynn, leading Trump supporter, hobnobbing with the Russian president during the campaign. I mean, we know that his communication with the Russian ambassador in December was only one in a series of contacts between Flynn and that Russian official, contacts that began before the election. I mean, the reporting here is that Russia actively meddled in our election and that General Flynn was talking to the Russian government while that operation was underway. What was going on in those conversations? Further to that point, the New York Times just moments ago has reported, citing 4 current and former American officials. The New York Times has just reported that it wasn't just Flynn. It was multiple Trump campaign aides and associates who had contacts with Russian intelligence officials in the year before the election, during the campaign, at a time when Russian intelligence officials were interfering in our election to help Donald Trump. What was the substance of those comments? What was the substance of those communications? Did Michael Flynn and these other Trump campaign staffers, did they know about Russian efforts to interfere in our election, which, according to the New York Times, were happening contemporaneously with their contact with those Russian officials? At the same time Russian officials were talking to Trump campaign people, Russian officials were trying to influence our election. Did those Trump campaign people know the Russians were doing it when they were talking to them? If they knew about it, did they try to stop them from doing it? Did they encourage them? Did they help them? We don't know. And I don't know if or how we're ever going to find out. I mean, is this just 100% a journalistic enterprise now? Or will our government get to the bottom of it? Will our government even try to get to the bottom of it? Joining us now is Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He's the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Schiff, thank you very much for being here tonight. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Let me ask your response, first of all, to this new reporting from the New York Times. I don't know if you had a chance to review it. The headline is Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. The New York Times citing multiple American sources saying that phone records and intercepted calls show that members of Trump's presidential campaign had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence officials during the campaign in the year before the election. I just wanted to get your response to that.
Well, this is really I think, the heart of the investigation, and that is, was there some form of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin? The Kremlin was engaged in illegal activities in the United States designed to influence the outcome of the election. Obviously, their intent was to help Donald Trump and hurt Secretary Clinton. And were Trump campaign surrogates or aides or others affirmatively working with the Russians towards that illegal object? That's really one of the central and most important allegations to be investigated. And we have agreement on a bipartisan basis to do that investigation. But there are a lot of big questions about whether we can really get that done. And one of them, frankly, is personified by one of the photos you showed, and that is Director Comey, because we are going to need his cooperation if we're going to do this investigation. We're going to need to know what the FBI has looked at, who they have talked to, what leads they have run down, what they haven't run down, what yet must be investigated. And there's a big question about whether we will get that cooperation. So that, I think, is one of the most serious sets of allegations. The other set of allegations involves that conversation in December between Flynn and the Russian ambassador. Was this done at the direction of the president, with the knowledge of the president, with the knowledge of others in the administration? It seems odd to imagine that Flynn was acting as some kind of a rogue agent. And it's, I think, entirely plausible that rather what he was doing was conveying to the ambassador and perhaps to others, we ought to explore anyone he had contact with, the idea, don't react to the Obama sanctions, we've got your back. That would be directly undermining the U.S. national security interest, and that is also another very serious issue we have to investigate.
Congressman, it was reported today that you told Democrats in a closed-door caucus meeting to expect more information to surface on this subject, and specifically about General Flynn in coming days. Can you tell us what you're expecting and why you advised your fellow Democrats of that?
You know, actually, I'm not sure where that came from, because I did talk to the caucus, but not about that. I don't have any understanding that some other shoe is right about to drop. I'm sure we will, during the course of our investigation, get a lot of information on these very issues, but I don't have any foreknowledge that something is about to break.
When you mentioned that Director Comey at the FBI is a key factor here in figuring out whether or not our government is going to investigate and, if need be, prosecute these matters, for me, it's just, I'm trying to look at this from a big picture, and I feel like what we know about this thus far is because people inside the government and inside the intelligence community have been willing to leak stuff to reporters. Clearly, it seems now clear from the facts and in terms of the White House admission that when the Justice Department went to the White House weeks ago and told them what they knew about General Flynn and that they were worried that he was potentially susceptible to blackmail, and so he was in a very scary position in terms of national security operating in the White House at the level that he was at. We know that the White House had no real reaction to that for weeks until somebody leaked it. Somebody leaked it to a reporter. It became public. They had a hard time answering public questions about it, and now Flynn's gone. Similarly with this New York Times reporting. Somebody has leaked to the New York Times that phone records and intercepted calls shows that members of the Trump campaign were talking to Russian intelligence officials. That's the only way we know it. I'm happy to have the information. I don't know if I should have confidence that any of the investigations inside the government, the FBI, any legislative investigation, any other form of investigation here, will be above board and impartial and will get further to the truth here.
Well, I can tell you a couple things. First of all, I'm certainly going to be pushing my hardest to make sure that we have a credible and a thorough investigation. And if I run into a roadblock in any direction, whether that comes from the House leadership or it comes from the FBI, I'm going to be public about it. I'm not going to be part of an investigation unless it is real and credible. But I'm going to push to get the work done. I think it's a fundamental responsibility of the Congress to investigate and oversee this. The other point I want to underscore is the one that you just mentioned, which is the president learned weeks ago that his national security advisor, not some low-level federal employee, his national security advisor had lied And that lie was conveyed to the American people. And you know what? They were okay with that. For weeks, they were okay with that, and likely Flynn would still be there today if the Washington Post hadn't broken that story. Now, what does that say about this administration? That they were willing to allow the public to be misled, even when they learned the truth. And the final point I want to make, and you began your program with this tonight, I'm so glad you did, focusing on Putin's attempt to discredit and eliminate his political rival or potential political rival. What the stakes are here, because, people ask, and Sean Spicer wants to suggest, what's the big deal about Flynn talking to the Russian ambassador? Isn't that sort of ordinary course of events? The big deal is this. We're in a global struggle with Russia right now. They are trying to propagate their authoritarian model around the world. They've ruined democracy, eliminated most democratic institutions in Russia. They're trying to dismantle democratic institutions in Europe. Liberal democracy is under assault. And we are still the last best hope of democracy around the world. And in that struggle, we cannot afford to be undermined at the very highest levels of the White House. And that's why this is so important.
Congressman Adam Schiff, member of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you for your time tonight. I know you're incredibly busy these days, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. All
right, much more ahead, including Tim Weiner going to be joining us, the foremost modern historian of the FBI and the CIA. He's got some very good insight into how big a deal this thing is that we are now going through as a country. Stay with us.